Hello, everyone, and welcome to On the Safe Side, a monthly podcast hosted by the editors of Safety and Health magazine, the official magazine of the National Safety Council. This is Kevin Drewley, Associate Editor at Safety and Health. And with me, as always, are my fellow Associate Editors, Alan Ferguson and Barry Bottino. Hello, fellas.
Hello.
This is our February 2023 episode, number 36 in the history of our podcast, and number XXXVI in the history of our podcast in Roman numerals, this being Super Bowl month and all. Wherever or however you're listening today, we thank you for spending some time with us. It certainly is appreciated. We know that many of you have had a unique journey into the safety profession, and we want to hear more about it for our My Story feature in our magazine. Submit your personal stories about how you got into the safety field by emailing us at safehealth@nsc.org. You can view past My Story entries and catch up on other news from around the safety world on our website, safetyandhealthmagazine.com. In this month's episode, Barry will take us on a deep dive into his feature story on staying safe in the cold, which offers multiple tips to safety professionals and workers who are encountering the elements while on the job. We also will be joined by Mike Kassman, a CSP and construction health and safety technician who serves as director of OSHA and disaster response training at CPWR, the Center for Construction Research and Training. We'll be discussing ladder safety with Mike in the latest installment of our 5 Questions With segment. And the three of us, as always, will also share lessons learned in our What Did We Learn segment. Is everyone ready to begin? Let's do this.
Each month here at On the Safe Side, we take a look at a feature story from the latest issue of Safety and Health magazine, which we call our Deep Dive segment. In the February issue, Barry has some tips about working safely in cold weather, a pertinent topic at this time of year. Barry, will you grab your snorkel and take us on this latest deep dive?
Sure thing, Alan. Thank you very much for the intro. As most of the country is feeling right now, when you walk outside, it's pretty cold out there. And those weather conditions, whether you're in St. Cloud, Minnesota or Tulsa, Oklahoma, they can have an impact on how workers do their jobs. Outdoor workers at this time of year are trying to do a job with an additional hurdle thrown at them, which is the weather. And that's what our story touches on, the cold weather hazards at this time of the year. Cold stress injuries and illnesses happen when our skin temperature and eventually our core body temperature falls, and the body can no longer maintain those temperatures at a healthy level. In some cases, this could result in things like hypothermia, frostbite, disorientation, and even in severe cases lead to coma and death. Perhaps the most impactful comment I got was from James Mulligan, who is the OSHA director for the Boston South area office. And he said that cold is just plain distracting to workers. He said it's very difficult to focus on not just the work at hand, but their own personal safety when it's so cold that workers are shivering. And in many places around the country, he said the weather makes it so that workers focused can shift from their work to how cold their hands are or how cold their feet are throughout a given day. And Mulligan has some personal experience. He started his career as a plumber on some large construction sites before he joined OSHA. And he said that your mindset changes when you're working outdoors in the winter. And his example was working in a large open building with 40-mile-an-hour winds coming off the Charles River in Boston.
So for workers who have to be outdoors at this time of year, how important is the right clothing?
Yeah, Kevin, I'm glad you brought that up. The clothing is probably the most important line of defense, obviously. And NIOSH says that loose-fitting and layered clothing offers really good insulation. Tight clothing, on the other hand, that can reduce blood circulation, which is especially important in the winter months and especially important when we're talking about proper blood flows to the extremities, like our hands and our feet, which tend to get colder quicker. Another big advance is in moisture wicking clothing. And there are several popular brands of this type of clothing, which you've seen worn by athletes in various sports on TV every weekend. And also any department store you go into these days often will have kind of its own house brand of those moisture wicking shirts and other clothing options. Now, Mulligan said when he was a plumber 2+ decades ago, he had no idea what moisture wicking clothing was. Yet today, even his 11-year-old son knows the importance of keeping moisture away from your body by wearing these garments. And keeping that moisture away from your body is imperative. If your body gets wet during cold temperatures, it's a recipe for disaster. Your body temperature will go down much faster than if it was dry. An example that the Mayo Clinic gives is that you can get colder when you're caught in the rain and your clothes get soaked. If you do get wet, especially in the wintertime, it's important for workers to change out of those clothes immediately and into some dry clothes. And workers should make sure they carry extra cold weather gear at all times, including gloves, socks, hats, a full change of clothes, and some blankets to keep cold stress at bay. And Mulligan said his late father gave him some great advice from his military service in the 1950s. And the elder Mulligan would tell his son, put a hat on your head and keep your feet dry. And that's excellent advice because studies say we lose about 10% of our body's heat through our head. So investing in a winter cap, a balaclava, or a hard hat liner if you're working outside is really important. When it comes to those precious feet of ours, they can get cold quickly, as we know. So you can keep them warm and dry by wearing waterproof boots or heavy rubber overshoes. Now, this didn't make the story, but Mulligan said that workers are a community and they share what works for them with each other. They talk regularly and they protect each other, especially in conditions of the wintertime that we see in many places. And Mulligan brought up that a friend of his is the area director for OSHA in Bismarck, North Dakota. And he said, can't imagine what it's like in Bismarck, North Dakota when it's really bad here in Boston too, that, there are some definite extremes that workers are in the wintertime. And what Mulligan said was that he learned from outdoor workers about hoodies with heating elements inside of them, and you can charge them overnight. He said that workers who wear them keep a spare pair of gloves in the pockets of the hoodies. When your hands get cold or they get wet, voila, they pull out the heated pair of gloves and put those on.
So, Barry, what are some other strategies for outdoor workers to stay safe in the cold?
Well, Alan, the OSHA's website discusses a three-word strategy, and that's simply plan, equip, and train. First things first, you got to check the weather each morning or even the night before and plan the clothes that you'll need to stay safe and warm. Whether that's via a weather app, whether that's via watching your morning news, either way, you're checking the weather is a positive thing. For employers, checking the weather can allow them to plan the work that will be done that day. Employers can equip workers with plenty of helpful tools and enact some engineering controls as well. And these can include using radiant heaters, shielding work areas from wind and drafts, and having warm locations for workers to take a break from the weather conditions. And as far as training goes, employers should train their workers on recognizing and acting on the symptoms of cold stress, which can include self-monitoring and also keeping an eye on those around you. Work can also be moved out of the elements on days that are especially cold. Mulligan mentioned that our bodies aren't built to work in 0 degrees, and he said a good question for an employer to ask is, do I need this work today when there are 40-mile-an-hour winds, or can I postpone it a couple of days?
Well, thank you so much once again, Barry, for your work on this story. If you want to read more about this or other topics, as well as news from around the safety world, please check out the February issue of Safety and Health Magazine or visit safetyandhealthmagazine.com. Every safety professional has a unique story, so what's yours? Safety and Health Magazine wants to hear about your unique path into the occupational health and safety field for our My Story column. Start the year off right by sending your submission to safehealth@nsc.org and share the road you traveled in your career journey of keeping workers safe and healthy. As many of our listeners know, falls are the leading cause of deaths and injuries annually in the construction industry. Ladders are among the main concerns when talking about falls. According to CPWR, the Center for Construction Research and Training, more than 70 deaths and 4,000 injuries that require missed time at work occur with ladders in construction. With us this month to talk about this issue, and with National Ladder Safety Month approaching in March, is Mike Kassman, CPWR's Director of OSHA and Disaster Response Training. Mike, thank you so much for joining us on the Safe Side.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So our first question, before using a ladder, how should it be inspected and why?
Well, one of the main things is why you should inspect the ladders, because those are the most common reasons why people are injured on the job. Using a ladder with missing rungs, bolts, cleats, or screws or even rivets. And even other things like say you're using an extension ladder, there's no rope included, or the pulley system is not running freely. There's no stickers. It's not legible. These things all go hand in hand, because how do you even choose the right ladder for the task? So you really inspection is like the first thing you want to do.
What are some musts to do to be sure you're safe when using ladders?
Well, they all some of these rules kind of like apply to all ladders, but you want to maintain a 3-point contact. At all times. You want to make sure that you maintain like what they call the buckle rule, where your body is in center of the two rails. You don't want to select the right ladder for the job. Take a look at the job. Take a walk around. I mean, what are you going to use the ladder for? Try to identify what the task is, what type of task that you're going to do. What are you going to use as you're using the ladder? Is it just for safe access, climbing up and down a roof landing level, or are you actually intending to work off the ladder? Because you don't want to carry tools while you're going up on the ladder, because that negates the 3-point climbing. Typically, if you're going to use a ladder to do a particular task, depending on the task, say you're using a screwdriver, you want to carry a tool belt. So you're not carrying anything in your hand to maintain, because it's you want to maintain that 3-point contact. Other things to be considered as you're climbing up and down a ladder, make sure that you're not looking away from your climb. You're looking up, or you're looking in the center, going downward. So you make sure you're not going to be missing a rung, for example. If you're using it for safe access, you want to make sure that the ladder extends at least 3 feet above the landing zone, and it's tied or anchored. There's other things to consider. There's several different ratings of ladders, so you want to make sure that you select the ladder properly for the task at hand, and it's properly for the the load that's going to be applied to it. So typically in the construction world, we're using, there's 5 types out there, and we're using 3 primarily, and it's type 1, which is heavy duty. And they have a rating system of about 250 pounds. A type 1A is 300 pounds, and a type 1 AA, which is 375 pounds. And so, before you even select the ladder, not only are you going to inspect it, but we kind of like walk the area, walk the job site, see even if a ladder is necessary. I mean, maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe you want to use an alternative, such as mobile elevating work platform, scissor lift, or maybe a cherry picker, that kind of thing. Because there's always a risk in using a ladder. Once it's determined that the ladder is the way to go, let's go back, and choose the right ladder for the job. Typically we use either a type 1A or double A, depending on the job. Everybody should be able to be trained in. The inspection goes a long way. Making sure that the labels are legible. Okay, so they're not defaced. I mean, if the labels are defaced, you can call the manufacturer and get a new sticker on that ladder. But it's important to keep that. Make sure those all that thing is maintained in a legible format. They'll send you new stickers if need be. Well, what happens if you find a defective ladder? Well, first of all, you don't want to use it. You want to remove it or tag it and remove it out of service to see if it can be repaired. In some cases, it may not be able to repair it, and you obviously get a new ladder.
Mike, you mentioned some alternatives to ladders. When you think about using a ladder on a job site, how do you know or not know if it's the right thing for the job, right equipment for the job?
First of all, I want to identify the task. What's the task? What am I doing? Is it a quick 5-minute job on a ladder? Or am I trying to install something? Is that item that I'm trying to install, is it a heavy object? It's not something that'd be safe to be carrying up. You're not supposed to carry anything up a ladder, but is it something that while I'm installing, it's pretty awkward? Will I lose my balance? So it's just certain things. A ladder should be only used for like a quick item. Nothing, I mean, like if you think about it, the days of carrying up a bundle of shingles for a roofer are gone. People are not doing that now. We've learned a long way. I mean, that's an added weight that, a person can easily lose their balance if they were to do that. I'm just giving you an example. But you want to look at the task, and then of course you want to look at the terrain. I mean, is the area in which you plan on using the ladder, is it leveled? Is there some extra preparation you have to do in order to utilize a ladder or set it up? When you set up a ladder, you want to make sure that it's 1/4 the distance of its height. Is there? I mean, can you do that there? Maybe you have to, if you're setting up the ladder for a safe access and you got some debris and what have you in the way, maybe that location that you identify either needs to be cleaned out, or maybe that's not the safest location to erect the ladder. But the alternatives, and that's what I would do, is if depending on the number of moves I have to do with the ladder, and if it's high enough where it's going to be probably faster and safer for the worker, I would select a mobile elevating work platform if that's. It all depends on the job. Like I said, I mean, they have other criteria when you select an alternative. The ground has to be leveled and that kind of thing as well. But it depending on what the task is, it could be the way to go.
So, Mike, as we mentioned, falls are obviously a major concern with ladders. What are some other dangers for workers that they should be aware of?
How about wind? If it's that could add to the situation. How about electrical? You never want to use a ladder in and around power lines. You want to try to maintain that safe distance of at least 10 or more feet. Typically in most of these, commercial jobs, the use of aluminum ladders, it's not recommended at all because of that. Most contractors are using either a wooden ladder or a fiberglass ladder, and actually, in some cases, the ladder of choice, prime choice would be the fiberglass ladder because of the longevity of the ladder, anti-corrosion resistant and that kind of thing. But yeah, so those are other kind of factors besides the wind and electrical. I mean, it could be unstable ground, where a ladder could slip away. So in some cases, you might have to tie not only the top of the ladder but barricade and tie the bottom of the ladder so it doesn't kick out. That kind of thing, and maybe even put barricade the bottom of the ladder to keep any traffic in and around, coming close to that bottom section.
Mike, you mentioned a few a little bit ago, but what more can you say about extension ladders and any specific concerns that may be related to those?
Are you using the extension ladder properly? Okay, is it, like I said, 1/4 of the distance in height? Is it tall enough? I mean, is this exactly because in a lot of cases people take chances where the ladder is really not tall enough, and they either overstretch. Okay, myself, I can tell you a personal story. I've been on many roofs over the years, and there's some instances where the ladder wasn't long enough, and I just took a gamble and made it up and onto the roof, and I was fine, did the job, and then on the way down, it's like, oh, I shouldn't have used that ladder. Yeah, I mean, fortunately, nothing happened in my case, but these are, people take a lot of chances, and you just got to really think about it, So get the right ladder for the job. Okay, if the ladder ain't tall enough, don't just take a chance like I just gave you a description. Go and get the right ladder for the job. Make sure it reaches at least 3 feet above the landing zone and it's tied. If the ground is unleveled, it's not a place where you want to just jury rig, or I would say like prop up like the ladder with boxes or what have you to reach that height, or use some type of other makeshift device to level that ground. Maybe choose another location if that's possible. Okay, because you start playing around with the unstable base, it kind of just adds to the risk of an injury, of a fall.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for sharing your knowledge with us on this topic. If our listeners want to find ladder safety resources from CPWR, where can they go?
Well, you can go right to our main website, cpwr.com, and right on the website itself, it's got a search box and type in the word ladder. You'll find some resources there to include hazard alert cards, which is a very good, some of the products that CPWR has created. Another one-stop place would be called stopconstructionfalls.com. And when you get to that website, on the top of that website, you'll see training resources. And by the way, there's a falls stand down campaign May 1st through the 5th this year, 2023. Where construction sites take a few minutes across the country, and they do a lot of toolbox talks and talking about preventing falls on the work site. But anyway, on this website, stopconstructionfalls.com, on the right-hand side, you'll see training resources. And if you click on that, there's just an abundant amount of resources available to get the word out. Whether you're on roofs, scaffolds, ladders, anything relating that potentially could be risk of having falls.
Thank you once again, Mike. We appreciate you being with us this month on the Safe Side.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
As we approach the end of this episode, it's about that time to discuss what we've learned in the past month, whether on the job or off, and to get things started. Speaking of CPWR, the Center for Construction Research and Training, they put out a very interesting report kind of examining the nearly 225,000 worker deaths in construction in 2020. And of those deaths, 60% were at least 65 years old, and they got this through the National Vital Statistics System. They included all causes of death for construction workers employed, retired, or no longer working from all but 3 states: Arizona, North Carolina, Rhode Island, and the District of Columbia. And the leading cause of death in this report varied by age group. For workers 16 to 34, the leading cause was poisoning or exposure to narcotics or hallucinogens. And for those 35 and older, COVID-19 was the leading cause of death. And that included nearly 15,000 workers 65 or older, and another 8,700 workers at least 65 years old died of heart disease. What about you, Barry?
Well, Alan, the one thing I learned this month was going back to my cold weather hazards story, and James Mulligan, who is from OSHA's Boston South area office, he made an interesting note about workers working together. And he said, always treated the job site like a team, like it was a hockey team, a football team, a baseball team, a soccer team. And in that regard, look out for each other in difficult circumstances. And when it gets to cold weather, look out for each other in those circumstances as well. Share advice or share, clothing, for example, with fellow workers who may need a hand, and look out for them. And when it comes to symptoms of cold stress injuries, Kevin, how about you?
Well, I'll stick briefly with cold, and it's as pertains to chemical safety, something that we had recently published online vis-a-vis the Chemical Safety Board, reminding facility operators about process safety management best practices as pertains to the winter and cold. Just the idea that freezing and expansion of water can crack or break pipes, it can damage equipment, or even lead to the failure of the machines and instruments and processes there on site. So they had published a few best practices and recommendations for winterization, and some of those dovetail with a lot of things that we cover and the safety professionals know about establishing a formal and written protection program, in this case for freezing, but just also things like surveying piping systems for dead legs, which are sections that have no flow. Also, some recommendations were just to identify and address the risk of the freeze-related hazards to piping and process equipment, and also, again, making a winterization checklist just to make sure that the plant and process systems are ready for cold weather, especially if it might be in a part of the country. And we've experienced some of that in suburban Chicago, where it might be cold 1 minute and then out of the blue in the 40s or 50s one day, and then back to cold. So just really being on top of that. And then lastly, and briefly hearkening back to our intro, I also learned that the NFL did not use the Roman numeral for the Super Bowl until Super Bowl V, or V, and then went and retroactively added those to the first 4 Super Bowls. And I suppose, and I imagine that Barry remembers it well because his favorite team won it. But for Super Bowl 50 a few years ago, that ordinarily would be Super Bowl L, but the powers that be did not like the way the L looked on its own, so they just used the Arabic 50 that year.
Is there something important that you learned this month? Share it with us via email at safehealth@nsc.org.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this month's episode. We know that your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending some of it with the 3 of us. If you'd like to share some feedback, please email us at safehealth@nsc.org. We'd also appreciate you rating and reviewing this podcast. To find stories such as Barry's feature on working in the cold and all of the latest news from around the safety world, visit us online at safetyandhealthmagazine.com. And make sure you follow us on your favorite social media channel as well. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Original music for this podcast was composed by Steve Maslin. Thank you so much, Steve. Also want to send big thank yous to our NSC colleagues Ryan Gruntish, Amy Bellinger, Debbie Meyer, Paul Walensky, Karen Lord, Melissa Ruminski, and Jennifer Yario. We'll be back next month to have more safety-related discussions, talk to trusted voices from around the profession, and hopefully make you smile a little. In the meantime, please stay on the safe side.